there is a strange silence inside most people's lives today. Not the peaceful kind, like a quiet morning with sunlight on your face, but the kind of silence that follows a question no one knows how to answer. What does it mean to live? Not to merely survive, not to perform, impress, hustle, or win, but to live. Deeply, honestly, soulfully. It's a question that pulses beneath the surface of our distractions, A question that stares back at us in moments of heartbreak, boredom, or success that doesn't feel like success at all. You get the job, you get the person, you get the applause. And still, something inside whispers, is this it? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and one of the most profound thinkers of the 20th century, spent his entire life wrestling with this question. But unlike many others, he didn't look outward for answers. He turned inward, to the unconscious, the forgotten, the archetypal, the spiritual. He believed that to truly live, you must meet the self, not the ego you wear like a mask, but the deeper, eternal part of you that longs to be known. Today, we chase meaning in algorithms and marketing mantras. We count likes and scroll endlessly, mistaking movement for progress. But Jung saw it coming. Long before the digital age, he warned that man was losing touch with his soul, that our modern obsession with logic, science, and external validation was leaving the human spirit starved. And yet, this is not a new problem. From ancient Greece to medieval mystics, from the Bhagavad Gita to Sufi poetry, human beings have always struggled with this longing for real life, not a life of survival, not a life built on someone else's blueprint, but a life lived from the inside out, a life that is whole. So, what does it mean to live life fully, authentically, consciously according to Carl Jung? This video is not about life hacks or morning routines. It is about the deeper terrain of the psyche, about navigating the shadows you've ignored, about understanding the archetypes that live within you, about reclaiming the pieces of yourself you've buried to fit in. Jung didn't promise comfort. He promised transformation. And transformation always begins in the dark, with an honest look at who we are and what we fear. So, if you've ever felt lost, if you've ever wondered why success feels hollow, or why love can't fill the void, this journey is for you. Because the question isn't just how to live life. The real question is how to become whole again. Throughout history, humanity has asked the same aching question in 1,000 different languages. What does it mean to truly live? And in nearly every age, the answers have reflected the dominant fears, values, and illusions of the time. In ancient Greece, the question of life was tied to virtue. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living," anchoring the meaning of life in self-inquiry and wisdom. For the Stoics, like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, to live well meant to master one's inner world, to remain calm and grounded, regardless of fate's cruelty. They taught that the only true freedom was self-control, the ability to respond rather than react. But not all traditions saw life through the lens of reason. The mystics of the East, Buddhists, Taoists, Hindus spoke of a different kind of living, one that transcends the ego entirely. To them, life is not something to be conquered, but something to be remembered, something already whole beneath the illusions of separateness. In Hinduism, the concept of dharma captures this ideal living in accordance with your soul's truth, your essence, your inner law. Taoism calls it wu, effortless action, living in flow with the natural order of the universe. And then there were the Christian mystics, the Sufis, the Kabbalists, spiritual explorers who believed that life becomes real when you surrender to the mystery of the divine, when you stop trying to control and start learning how to commune. Rumi, the great Sufi poet, once wrote, "Don't seek water, become thirsty." In other words, to live deeply is not to possess answers, but to awaken longing. By the time Carl Jung entered the scene in the early 20th century, the Western world had become obsessed with rationalism, industrial success, and surface-level identity. Akani had opened the door to the unconscious. Akani stepped through it and discovered a vast symbolic landscape: dreams, archetypes, myths, spiritual awakenings. Akani, he saw the psyche not just as a mechanism to be fixed, but as a soul to be understood. And here lies the heart of Jung's answer to the question of how to live life. We do not live fully until we encounter the self, not the persona we wear for others, not the ego that seeks comfort and praise, but the self, the totality of who we are, both light and shadow, both conscious and unconscious, both divine and human. Jung believed that modern man was spiritually homeless, cut off from myth, from ritual, from meaningful suffering. He warned that our technological progress had outpaced our emotional evolution, that we had grown brilliant at manipulating the world, but ignorant of ourselves. In his own words, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. He didn't see religion as outdated, but as psychologically essential. Not necessarily in the dogmatic sense, but as a symbolic container for meaning. Myths, he said, are not primitive lies, but psychological truths encoded in story. They show us the journey of becoming, of descending into darkness, facing the dragon within, and returning with treasure. In every age, this theme appears: the call to live authentically, the call to wake up. But never before has it been so easy to sleepwalk through life, to substitute performance for purpose, to accumulate experiences without ever touching the soul. That is why Jung's teachings matter now more than ever, because they speak not just to the mind, but to the forgotten parts of you, the parts that ache when you're alone, the parts that feel tired even after rest, the parts that know something isn't right, but can't name what's missing. To live, truly live, in the Jungian sense, means to turn toward the unknown within, to listen to the quiet inner voice beneath the noise, to allow suffering to shape you, not destroy you, and to remember that your life, your real life, won't be found on the surface. It will be found in the depths. Carl Jung's psychological map of the human soul is one of the most profound frameworks ever created for understanding what it means to truly live. Unlike Freud, who focused largely on pathology and suppressed desires, Jung believed the human psyche had a sacred architecture, one built not only to survive, but to evolve, to expand, to become whole. At the center of Jung's philosophy is the concept of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world told you to be, not the image you crafted to be loved, but the full, integrated self. To individuate is to move from fragmentation to unity, from pretending to becoming, from wearing masks to embodying truth. Jung taught that every human being has within them a constellation of psychological forces, what he called archetypes. These are universal patterns that show up in myths, dreams, stories, and across cultures. The hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the trickster, the anima and animist, inner feminine in men, and the inner masculine in women. These are not just characters, they are aspects of you that live in your unconscious, influencing your thoughts, your fears, your choices. Let's take the shadow, for example. This is the part of you that you deny, repress, or project onto others. Your anger, your envy, your vulnerability, your selfishness, anything you were taught is unacceptable. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding their shadow. But Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Real living begins when you stop running from your shadow and start learning from it. Not to indulge it blindly, but to integrate it, to make peace with the parts of you you've buried. The persona is another concept central to Jungian thought. It's the mask you wear in society, the curated identity you present to be accepted. We all need personas to some extent. They help us navigate the social world, but the danger arises when you become your persona and forget who you are behind it. That's when life becomes a performance and the soul starves behind the curtain. Modern psychology has since built on Jung's foundation. Concepts like inner child healing, attachment theory, and shadow work all echo Jung's original insights. Even therapies like CBT and mindfulness, though more clinical in nature, stressed the same core idea that our internal world creates our external experience, that how we relate to ourselves determines how we live. But Jung went further. He bridged psychology with mythology, science with mysticism. He believed that the psyche was not just personal, it was collective. That we carry within us not just our personal trauma, but the longings and wounds of humanity itself. So, when you ask how to live, Jung's answer is not a checklist. It's a descent, a return to the inner world, courageous confrontation with your own truth, because the goal is not to be perfect, but to be whole. And wholeness, Jung said, is the only real measure of a life fully lived. When we fail to live in alignment with our inner truth, when we avoid the path of individuation that Jung described, the consequences ripple through every part of our lives. Not always dramatically, not always visibly, but quietly, insidiously, like a slow leak in the soul. The first casualty is often identity. We confuse our persona, the roles we play, the titles we wear with who we really are. You become the good student, the reliable one, the funny friend, the perfect parent, and in the process, your deeper desires, your unspoken longings get silenced. Jung warned that if we live too long within the mask, we eventually forget there's anything underneath. The self, the true self, becomes a stranger in your own life. This disconnection leads to emotional numbness. You might function well, meet expectations, even achieve external success, as something always feels ... off, as if life is happening around you, not through you. Relationships feel hollow, work feels mechanical. You laugh without joy, cry without release. And at night, you lie awake, haunted by a feeling you can't explain, a quiet ache, a missing piece. Over time, this spiritual and psychological neglect manifests in more tangible ways. Anxiety, depression, burnout, addiction, not as random illnesses, but as symptoms of a deeper misalignment. Jung once wrote, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering." In other words, when we avoid the pain of becoming our true selves, we create new, artificial forms of suffering to fill the void. Our relationships suffer too. When you haven't met your own shadow, you project it onto others, The parts of yourself you haven't accepted, the jealousy, the fear, the neediness start showing up in your judgments of other people, You blame your partner for being too emotional when you've disowned your own vulnerability, You resent your friend's confidence because you haven't faced your own fear of inadequacy. This is how unconsciousness creates conflict, not just within, but between. And perhaps the most tragic consequence of avoiding your inner life is that you never get to live your own story. You inherit someone else's script, your cultures, your social media feed. You follow the path you're told is successful, only to find that the summit is empty. You look back and realize you never asked, what do I truly want? What was I born for? Jung believed that meaning was not found in comfort, but in integration. That suffering, when faced with awareness, was the doorway to depth. He wrote, "Only the wounded physician heals." The parts of you that have suffered most are often the key to your deepest purpose. But if you run from them, if you numb them, you also numb your capacity for joy, connection, and transcendence. Even in ancient times, this truth was understood. The Greek myth of Chiron, the wounded healers, a symbol of Jung's message. Chiron, a wise centaur, could not heal his own wound, yet he became the most gifted healer of others. Jung saw this archetype in all of us, that it is through our wounds, not in spite of them, that we awaken. So, when we ignore our shadow, when we live only on the surface, when we try to bypass the hard questions in favor of comfort, we may avoid temporary pain, but we invite long-term emptiness. To live unconsciously is to trade vitality for safety, to protect the ego at the cost of the soul. And that, Jung would argue, is not truly living. Carl Jung never promised that the journey toward wholeness would be easy. In fact, he warned that it would be one of the most challenging things a person could undertake. But he also made it clear, the only life worth living is the one where you become yourself. Not the self you invented to survive, but the self that was buried underneath the noise. So, how do we begin? The first step is self-observation, not analysis, but awareness. Jung emphasized the importance of making the unconscious conscious. One of the most powerful tools for this is journaling. It's not the kind filled with to-do lists, but honest reflection. Write about your dreams, your fears, your resentments, your fantasies. Let the pen show you what your mind has hidden. Over time, patterns will emerge. Symbols, repeated thoughts, suppressed desires. These are the breadcrumbs back to your deeper self. Dreams, Jung believed, are the royal road to the unconscious. He encouraged his patients to record their dreams and reflect on their symbolic meaning. You don't need to interpret them like a scientist. Just observe. Ask yourself, what is this dream trying to show me? What emotion is hidden beneath this image? Often, the answers are not literal, but they are real. Next, begin shadow work. This doesn't mean indulging your darker impulses, but acknowledging them with compassion. When you notice jealousy, anger, insecurity, pause. Don't suppress it or project it onto someone else. Instead, ask, where did this come from? What does it need from me? The goal is not to eliminate your shadow, but to integrate it, to let it teach you. Therapy, especially Jungian or depth-oriented therapy, can be a sacred container for this work. But even without a therapist, you can practice inner dialogue, a technique where you write or speak from different parts of yourself. Let the wounded child speak. Let the inner critic respond. Let the wise inner adult mediate. Over time, you'll develop a more nuanced relationship with yourself, where all parts are heard and healed. Spiritual practices also play a key role. Jung respected religious symbols, not as doctrines, but as mirrors of the psyche. Meditation, for instance, helps you step outside the ego and witness the deeper flow of consciousness. Stoic reflection teaches you to accept life's pain without losing yourself. Sufi poetry softens the heart and reminds you that longing is sacred. You don't need to belong to any one system, but find what resonates with your soul. Even modern tools like cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, or somatic awareness can assist in regulating emotions and building self-trust. But remember, they are tools, not substitutes for deeper work. Healing is not linear. You'll revisit old wounds. You'll feel lost at times as part of the process. One of the most powerful daily practices is asking the right questions. Not, what should I do? But, what is life asking of me right now? What part of me have I abandoned to feel accepted? Where am I performing instead of being? These questions open doors the ego can't reach. Lastly, be patient. Jung wrote, "You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Growth is slow, but it's real. And each time you choose honesty over comfort, depth over distraction, you reclaim a part of your soul. Living life Jung's ways, not about perfection. It's about integration, about showing up whole, even when broken, about letting your wounds breathe, about trusting that the deeper you go, the more alive you become. Because, in the end, to live fully is to remember who you aren't to become it, one step at a time. So, what does it mean to live life truly, deeply, courageously, in the way Carl Jung envisioned? It means stepping off the conveyor belt of imitation and entering the wilderness of your own becoming. It means turning away from the distractions that numb and listening instead to the quiet hum of your soul calling you home. It means no longer asking, what do they expect of me? But rather, what is real within me that longs to be lived? For Jung, the goal of life was not happiness in the shallow sense, but wholeness. To embrace both the light and the dark within you. to hold your contradictions with grace, to descend into the unknown parts of yourself, not to fix them, but to understand them, to make peace with your past and reclaim what you abandoned to survive. This is not a path for the faint-hearted. It will ask you to confront your deepest fears, to walk through nights of confusion, to lose parts of yourself that were never truly yours. But on the other side is something the world cannot give and cannot take: inner authority. A life lived not from duty, but from authenticity. A life with depth, with roots, with meaning, across time and culture, from the ancient mystics to the quiet rebel souls of today. The same wisdom echoes. The outer world will always be uncertain. But the inner world, if you are brave enough to enter, it holds the keys to your real life. Jung did not offer shortcuts. He offered a mirror. And in that mirror, you see not just who you are, but who you could become, if only you stopped running. So maybe living life isn't about chasing more. Maybe it's about returning to the forgotten self, returning to the questions that ache in the quiet, returning to the mystery of your own soul. Because to live, in the truest sense, is not to escape death, but to stop dying slowly inside. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that we do, but that many never truly live. So the invitation is simple, not easy, but simple. Stop pretending, start becoming, and let your life be the answer to the question your soul has been whispering all along. If something in your heart stirred while listening, if a sentence made you pause, the truth felt too close to ignore, then maybe that's not an accident. Maybe it's your soul reminding you that it's still here, waiting to be met. On this channel, we don't chase trends. We don't offer surface-level advice or empty motivation. We go deeper to the forgotten corners of psychology, into the ancient wisdom buried beneath modern life, into the emotional truth most people are too busy or too afraid to face, because we believe that life is not meant to be performed. It's meant to be lived. And living requires courage, requires questions that don't have easy answers. It requires returning to the self, the one you left behind, to be accepted, to be efficient, to be successful. So if you're tired of the noise, if you're ready for content that makes you think, feel, and grow, this is your space. Subscribe not just to follow, but to remember. To remember that your pain is meaningful, that your questions are sacred, that your story matters, even if it's messy, especially if it's messy. Here, we explore the teachings of Jung, Nietzsche, Freud, Sufi poets, Stoic thinkers, and spiritual mystics, not to quote them for aesthetics, but to let their insights breathe into your life. We connect the dots between psychology and soul, between history and healing, between who you are and who you're becoming. So join us, not for entertainment, but for inner transformation, not for shortcuts, but for the kind of wisdom that stays with you when the screen turns off. And when you're ready to ask the hard questions, when you're ready to live from the inside out, we'll be right here, walking the path with you. Because this journey isn't just yours, it's ours.